Hello and welcome to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson, a podcast for those seeking the ultimate in wine, food, and travel. Each week she interviews winemakers, chefs, celebrities, and a variety of guests that shape the way we enjoy life.
Is a grape that I know that Napa's never grown before, ever, in modern history at least, and certainly I don't think the Italians were growing it, but Mencia. From northwestern Spain, like from the Bierzo area. So I mentioned when I was a sales rep in Georgia, in our book, we were responsible for a producer named Raul Perez, who I'd never heard before until I started working there, and before then I'd never heard of Mencia. And I remember doing inventory in the warehouse 1 month when I was over there and seeing the packaging for Raul Perez and thinking it was very sort of modern looking and interesting, and just being caught by the typeface that he uses for his name, and from there that's all it took was that spark, and I was curious what it was, and I looked it up, and then I finally had it. And it's my dog Hash Brown.
We have a puppy in our hands.
Hash.
That's very excited because
he probably sees a squirrel or a turkey. Hash Brown. Hash, come here.
This is what a winery sounds like.
Hash. So, anyway, we planted a Hash. Come here.
You know, that's really fascinating. I've never even heard of this variety.
Yeah, you can. It's definitely sort of caught on in the last couple of years in the little Somme community.
Of course.
That I've noticed. Raul Perez, you mentioned that at around any level 2 or 3, or of course the master, they'll recognize that name, and it's pretty cool. Depending on where you get it, the sort of lower end stuff can be, pretty mild and light. And then you get some of the single vineyard stuff that's grown at a higher elevation, and it gets pretty concentrated and tasty. And up until recently, it was thought of as being pretty closely related to Cab Franc. And then, of course, everyone's doing DNA testing of every Vitis vinifera they have, and that just debunked 100 years worth of people thinking it was related to Cab Franc. So I actually can't remember off the top of my head what it's actually closely related to, but I'm excited. I think, like with everything else we get up here, I think we'll get some great concentration with it, and we'll see where it goes from there. Now we play the waiting game. Unfortunately, I was so enthusiastic and excited once I got permission to plant it, and then a little downtrodden when I then realized, okay, now we're still 3 or 4 years out from useful fruits, and then we got to figure out what we're going to do with it, and it's all very exciting, but it's a very slow burn at this point.
Where did you get the cuttings?
The Mencia, our general manager Matt tracked him down from. It's not even a commercial nursery. I think it's this I can't remember what Matt called it, but it's just this little proprietary nursery that UC Davis does for some of its experiments and I think some clones that it's trying to get virus free and other things that are just kept away from the Gen Pop.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing is when we reserved the amount of clones we needed, up until recently, we were actually told by the nursery that we're actually going to get half of what we reserved, which was frustrating, but it's also kind of exciting because you have to wonder where the other half is going. Huh. So it means someone else got them, someone else is interested in the varietal, someone else is incorporating it into their programming. So it tells me that it could be a good direction to go in. Just based on that as well, which is interesting. So what we're going to do is half that block was budded last week was field grafted last week to Mencia, and then the other half is still rootstock that we're then going to let cycle for another year, and then we're going to bud over from our own cuttings to the other half.
Fascinating.
So we're not even fully there even yet. So it'll take a little while.
Definitely a game of patience, but I, for one, am very excited to try when it does come to fruition. Yeah. Just the name sounds sexy, right?
Yeah.
Thea.
Yeah. Although in America, it's spelled Mencia, so most Americans would be calling it Mencia, and I think anyone my age or a little bit older will associate that with the comedian that fell from grace, 10 years ago at this point, Carlos Mencia, for being a fraud and not being funny. But that people here will say Mencia, and then perhaps the pretentious people in America will then very, very obviously emphasize the th and pronounce it Mencia, and then become very annoying. Either way, it's going to be a tough word.
Yes, but what a fun project, and clearly you had to have immense attraction to allocate so much resources, energy, space, planning for it, because it's not a simple task.
Yeah.
That kind of commitment takes some real stamina.
Yeah, and it's from a position of tremendous privilege that Keenan, we can get away with kind of taking a risk with something that's never been done before, because all of our other programs are strong. We've been doing quite well. We've got a great, healthy business here, and so that's what I felt that we not only owed it to the world of wine to try and progress and experiment with something new because we were in that position of success, but we owed it to ourselves too to really push what else can we do on this property that's really cool. We've definitely checked the boxes a lot hard with everything we've done for the last nearly 50 years. And this is really the first big, brand new experiment we've really done in 3 generations.
It's quite a remarkable thing if you think about it, especially in the context of age of Napa Valley in general.
Yeah.
Your presence here since 74 and having this 50-year history. It had to have been an immense challenge to begin with. Now, everybody seems to either be in the wine business or want to be in it. But at the time, it wasn't that way at all. No.
Although you talk to a lot of people that worked in the business back then, and it was pretty easy to sell Napa if you had it on the label. If you had the right network, you could make a decent amount of volume disappear into other states with relative frequency and with relatively, not a lot of pushback. And there's a ton of reasons for that. One, because the New World, America, didn't have all of the other wine regions that it now has online. Online, there was just no other competitors. It was Napa or nothing. It was Napa or jug wine. That's really were your California options in the 50s and 60s. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. I often say it's never been a better time to be a consumer of wine. Because it's never been more competitive than it is now, and people are forced to deliver the very best product at the very lowest price, no matter what they're making. So it's a good time to be a drinker of wine.
Agreed, wholeheartedly. What was your first commercial vintage?
77.
77. So, which also, when we think about it in the context of Judgement in Paris, that had to have helped.
Totally. Also helped to have bought the land before the Judgement in Paris too, where I've never read any metrics, and I'm sure they're out there, but I am often curious, the change based on the decision in Paris and what that did to real estate prices from one day to the next.
Oh my goodness, yes, good point.
So yeah, just getting in before that, and absolutely that turned Napa into what it is. That before that, Napa was known as this place can make good wine, but it has no national prestige. Certainly doesn't have any international prestige. Decision in Paris was great because there were so many conspiring powers here in Napa that were slowly building that desperately needed that one galvanizing moment. Hash brown. Hash. And depending on who you talk to, especially if you talk to the French, they'll tell you that this was a conspiracy, and the decision in Paris is not all that it's been amplified to be here in the New World, and that perhaps those judges didn't realize that they're actually in a real judgment at the time when they had the American wine in front of them. So it's become at this point, and I know that's probably controversial, and Steve Spurrier is probably nearby, yeah, in the end, it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. What happened. It thrust Napa on the international stage, and it's never relinquished that spot.
I was at a wine writers symposium a couple of years ago, and it happened to be the one where Steven Spurrier was a keynote speaker. And there was a French attendee that actually was an editor of, from what I understand, a pretty popular magazine, and she called him out in a very dramatic fashion.
About the conspiracy.
Absolutely. She was very sore about it, and she was relatively young. So somehow it's still a very, very sore subject from what I gather, and it kind of proves the point. Yeah. Why would you care if it wasn't true?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, at the same time, though, the French are so passionate and defensive about their national treasure, which is everything that has to do with the grape, and on many levels, I totally respect that. I wish Americans could be as aggressive about some of their culture as the French
Agreed.
are.
Well, Spurrier's response, I thought, was fantastic because she basically insinuated that he chose kind of secondary or less prominent and conversely not as well-performing French wines. You know, the implications that he rigged.
I could definitely believe that.
He actually said it was the opposite. It was the best wine he had in his shop at the time that he truly believed in. He had never had the intention of, in any way, getting behind California wines, of proving that they have legs. It was basically an opportunity for him to raise the popularity of his own shop, to elevate his brand image.
Yeah.
He had no stake in California, you know, being anything other than perhaps a pawn in his scheme. So
And then inadvertently,
it was a complete accident.
I can believe that. That seems the most plausible for me. Spurrier's out for he's out for his business. It makes sense.
He was a merchant. He was a wine merchant. So he was teaching classes. He was selling goods. So it was just a way to attract attention to his shop. That's all it was.
Yeah.
So I have a really hard time believing, even after much scrutiny, that there was any ill intent involved or any attachment to either side. Maybe, if anything, he was probably more biased towards the French. His shop was in Paris.
Probably.
That was his livelihood.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as far as Napa is concerned, that was obviously a momentous occasion, and it let the world know and put it on serious notice what Napa is.
Yeah, and then you had shortly thereafter, you had in 85, that first 100-point Parker wine, the Groth.
Yep.
With Niels Venge as the winemaker.
By the way, yes.
Who's been a part of our lives up here on Spring Mountain ever since I can remember. His name is still on the back of our label. Although his role has changed since what it was in the 90s when my dad first came on. He was brought on primarily as an entree to people we needed to source fruit from, because he's the guy in Napa, especially in the in the 90s. Everyone knows Nils and everyone loves him, and he knows everybody. And so he was instrumental in assisting my dad establishing himself here and building his network in order to source fruit that we desperately needed, especially in the late 90s when we had lost almost everything we have here to phylloxera. So we went through a large replanting starting in 95 and carrying on through 98. We were replanting everything. So Nils was really, really important for smoothing the road so we could continue production and continue putting something out there. When it would have been much harder without him.
But that kind of continuity, though, there's very few examples. Again, in Napa Valley, Schaefer Vineyards has had the same winemaker for decades, and a few others. But even though, like you said, it was various capacities, but that relationship endured.
Totally.
I just saw him yesterday.
Yeah, he's got he's got two acronyms associated with his name, and it's been this way since I think 2001. One is CWW and the F is FLG. CWW has a bad word in it, so I'll refrain from saying that right now. But FLG is his core role now on the Keenan team, which is a frequent lunch guest. on Tuesdays and Fridays, we traditionally my dad, but oftentimes Matt or Laura will prepare lunch for whoever happens to be here in the tasting room, and it's become pretty solid tradition that Nils will find his way up here on both days and join us for lunch over there at the table and hang out.
So wait, the guests that happen to be here on those 2 days?
Yeah. So every now and then, if there's a small group there that's having a good time and we get a good vibe from them, we'll invite them over. Sometimes it's too big and you can't do much about that. But if there's room at the table, anyone's welcome, and they'll sidle up and fix themselves a plate and drink whatever. We usually recently we've been doing some back vintage focusing for these lunches. So if you do happen to be at the table, we'll usually have some really kick-ass stuff open.
You guys just heard a massive incentive right there to come up and participate.
Yeah. Although that I of all the many things that I would love to slowly tweak about our daily hospitality program, the one thing I would probably wouldn't want to get locked in on as far as expectation is preparing food. That's the albatross that I would never want, just because it's just preparing food for large amounts of people is tough. I don't know. It's a talent in and of itself that I don't have. I always I buy too much or too little. So, but I like it more as an organic thing where people have no idea it's about to happen, and then they get invited over the table.
That's pretty special, though.
Some barbecue, to
break bread with you.
It's just one of those little experiential moments that are so key to provide for even just once for your tasting group. That'll let us stand up above the 6 or 7 or 8 other wineries that they saw this day and the next before they go home.
Wow.
That's how you stand out, because there's so many people that make good wine in this valley. That's not how you stand out anymore. You gotta combine that with that experiential value, the story, of course, and then a little bit of polish. I mean, your label's still got to look good. As tertiary as that is, it's still got to look good. Just the little details. People are spending a lot of money on your wine. Everything's got to look good. It's got to be polished. Everything has to be thought over and have a reason.
So going back to the early years, how many wines was the brand producing like in the 70s and 80s? I should say late 70s, 80s.
Yeah, our core SKUs were we did a Chardonnay, and this of course was before AVAs or sub-AVAs, so it was just the Napa Chardonnay, Napa Merlot, Napa Cabernet, and then we also did it in 77, we made a Pinot. Which we never did again. So yeah, that was the core four, and then the Pinot was nixed, and then I think, every now and then my grandfather would release like a little Vintner's Reserve of Cabernet, but not a consistent SKU. Really, our lineup got locked into what it is and got expanded dramatically, really, in 97 when my dad took over. He brought in Marinay. In 98, we started Zin. In 98, we also started Mailbox, so maybe that was 97. In 02, we did this. We started Syrah. In 99, we started doing the single vineyard Cab Franc. I mean, everything. Our everyday lineup pretty much tripled when my dad took over within the first 5 years. So we make a lot of wine and a lot of different SKUs, and that also is a little bit of a challenge when it comes to going back to that 3-tier distribution system. Is coming in with 10 different SKUs that are all 500 cases or less is just an absolute nightmare for them. They want that core 2 SKU, that they can rely on for volume, and they don't have to worry about a little bit of Syrah, a little bit of Zin, a little bit of Cab Franc. We love it that way because we get to make more things and geek out over different expressions of this and that, but distributors hate it. They hate it.
97 obviously been a year for California.
Yeah, although I would say that if from the ones that I've been able to get my hands on recently, and just from the vibe that I'm getting from the sommelier community, a lot of the 97s are some of them are falling apart. This is a hot year, and everyone's kind of refocusing on the 98s, being super badass. We weren't doing a ton of stuff from our own property in 98, unfortunately. I believe we did source some fruit from Oakville and from some other places, but for all the years to be down, unfortunately, we are not producing a lot of our own fruit in 98. We're still replanting a ton of stuff. But yeah, that's 97 was pretty badass, seemed like, for the first 10, 15 years, but 98 is the real winner if you're going side by side today.
Yes, I often think of it in the same terms as 2011. That was quite shunned.
Totally. And late harvest pushing into November. Yeah. I mean, we were pulling, I don't know so much about 98, but in 2011, we were pulling Cab Franc off the vine in the beginning of the second week in November, which is one of our later harvests we've ever had. And again, hard wines to sell right off the bat, especially 2011s. I was living in Atlanta at the time when 2011 for a lot of our SKUs was our current release. And I can't tell you how many restaurants and retail shops wouldn't even see it. They just don't even bother coming in to sample me. We're not buying 2011s because of the critical reception, the Parker scores, the Galoni, all yada yada. It just 2011 was just totally kicked under the rug when it was new. And some of those wines were bad. And some of the wines that have become good were even bad back then. They just were disjointed and vegetal and strange. 2011 now and has been for quite some time been one of my favorite vintages we've ever made because of that cool climate influence, that super acidity, all those subdominant savory characteristics that are normally very subtle take much more of a front seat in a lot of those expressions in 2011, which is pretty cool. 2011 shows you what Napa can do. It's just really that deeper part of that spectrum, that more sort of cooler climate, vegetal, savory kind of expression that you mostly associate with the old world. Napa still is capable of doing. If you're a lot of the small farmers were able to make good wine in 11 because they're a little bit more agile with their vineyards. They can make decisions a lot faster and at a later date. And we were no exception. We were able to move really quickly and make decisions really quickly and get people up here to assist us with labor really quickly because we're only managing 47 acres here and we know each block like the back of our hands. Those larger operations definitely ran into some issues. Couldn't achieve ripeness. A lot of stuff. So
there's a hot tip. 2011s took a bit of a beating price-wise because there was so much negativity, and there's still bargains.
Yeah, if you see 2011s and you know your producer, definitely grab them. I know that we have plenty left that we're waiting. Hopefully next year for one of our private events, I want to do a 2011 focus on everything that we made that year, because we still got plenty of it left. A couple dozen cases of each SKU for sure, enough to do a nice event and then sell them.
And that's exciting.
It's a great vintage. Yeah.
So in terms of house style, if you will, what has been the evolution, if there's such a thing, in terms of your winemaking point of view?
There's a pretty significant difference between my grandfather and my dad. My grandfather was all about pure torture, so we were almost essentially 100% dry farms by and large for everything that we did. So as a result of that and a few other things, the wines that my grandfather made were tough. I mean, they were tough wines, and they were built to age. I mean, he was not interested in his wines being open really within the first 10 years. And he could give a damn about, by the glass programming and blah, blah, blah. These wines are meant for the cellar. They were meant to be up there with the world-class ageable wines from Bordeaux that can go 40, 50 years. And he thought the main tool to help him get there was just build out the beefiest, most stressed out vine you can with no water, and just get those tannins so thick that you can cut them with scissors. Those wines were very aggressive and tough to drink for the first 10, 15 years. And now we're getting into some of these wines from the 80s that are just absolutely just wonderful, beautiful expressions, very delicate expressions of Cabernet. And you would not believe some of the color and extraction that we get. At 30 years old, some of our wines look like they're younger than 10. I mean, it's just crazy the color extraction we get here on the hillside on Spring Mountain. For my dad's part, the realities of the market were different. It was more competitive, and you needed to be coming with some wines that could turn and burn a little bit faster. So the wines aren't nearly as aggressive when they're younger. I mean, we still have that tannin, that structure, that ageability. 30 years is now kind of the sweet spot for a lot of our wines. That really sweet vintage is going to still go 40, but we've now reached this really happy medium where our wines are especially our Cabernets, are still approachable within 6 years of its life. It's still quite tasty. 10, 15 years is when you hit that first sweet spot, and then it kind of cycles down. And when you get into those late 20s, these wines kind of behave strangely and they kind of get shut down. And then when you hit that 30-year mark again, they open up and become really, really inviting. But I guess the core difference, to answer your question, is these wines are a little bit more approachable at a younger age. And my dad's found that perfect balance where we're not sacrificing the structure and the ageability in favor of younger drinking. It's this perfect little balance.
Are any of the wines from the 80s you made with your grandpa's hand, are they still available at all in any sense?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we'll have to live vicariously through you then.
I mean, there's always something that we can work out, but as far as sales and marketing, no, they don't exist.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a single vintage that we've completely erased from the existence of our library. We still have a little bit of usually a case or a half case left of almost everything.
Wow.
And I've never seen a bottle of Pinot lying around though. That's the one thing I haven't seen. So I don't know about that. But we can work something out. Off mic. But I had a bottle of 89 yesterday actually. When everyone had left, I opened a bottle of 89 Merlot on the deck over there with some of my friends, and it was just badass. And again, the color, it was awfully similar to this color. And for those listening, I'm holding a 2015 Cabernet. Just the extraction we get up here is crazy. I mean, of all the issues we have and all the challenges we have to overcome farming up here and in the cellar, color extraction is never one of those. It's just these grapes bleed black. It's great.
That's very exciting. You mentioned that you're involved in production amongst many other things, it sounds like. So what role would you consider yourself, in a way, an apprentice of Neil's when you learned from him? I mean, are you involved, pretty deeply into the production, especially during harvest? What does that look like? Nils, from as far as my experience here in my career, was never our hands-on winemaker. So from what I've learned has been from Art, our cellar master, Matt, our general manager, and my dad. And those three people really, to this day, and have been since 90. Well, Art started in 03, so really in 03 they've become our triumvirate. I refer to them as the winemaking triumvirate of Keenan. So we don't have anyone that has the label
winemaker here. It's general manager, cellar master, and then my dad calls himself the president. But that's essentially the three people are responsible for different parts and aspects of the winemaking process. My dad is much more obviously the global sense. He directs the program, codifies his focus and what he desires to see, and Matt then executes those orders and makes them real in the cellar based on the decisions that he makes then in the vineyard. And then he will work with Art. Art is the shepherd of the day-to-day of the cellar and manages the wine on a very granular level. So yeah, it's really the three of them, and I exist on the perimeter there, yelling and screaming, and mostly asking questions and learning as I go. And then in 2017, I made my first wine, which was a Merlot field blend from that block. We actually ripped out and replaced with the 3 new grapes. So it was a fairly well of that block of Merlot, which has a special twist to it. There is one other grape that existed in that block of Merlot that was mistakenly planted there when it was originally field grafted over, and it's a blend that you've never seen in your life. It's never existed before, at least commercially. So it's something really new and weird. And you saw it in the barrels yesterday. So it still hasn't been bottled. It's going to be bottled later this summer. And then last year I did my first Chardonnay, which was an early harvest Chardonnay. I picked it 9 days before we picked the house Chardonnay here, and then natural fermentation style, no inoculation. We just put it in the barrel and let it go and just see what happens. And obviously the fear there is it won't finish fermentation. It'll get stuck at like 2 bricks, and there's not much you can do. And but it was only 2 barrels, pretty low risk, and so that was the twist. It was earlier harvest, so higher acid, lower pH. And then no inoculation. Just going to take off with natural yeast and see how that goes. So that has already been bottled. I have yet to figure out what the label is going to look like. So it's just in shiners downstairs, and then I'll have to hand label it at some point. But and then this year I'm thinking about doing something with Cab Franc. So I'm just going to up until the day that I take over the real program, the flagship programs. I think that's probably the plan, is just experiment with one-off things that are either slight variations of what we do already, or just completely new things and new directions, and kind of just hover around 2 to 3 barrels in terms of volume, something that's manageable, something that we can just do here in this tasting room, and something that we won't have to bother our distributors with.
So you learned everything that you know by observation, osmosis.
Yeah. For me, it's much more touch and feel rather than the learning at school. We have the true chemistry background.
Yeah,
that's totally not me. So if I have a conversation with someone who really does have an enology background, learned everything at UC Davis, there are a lot of things that person can say that I understand from a touch and feel standpoint that I can execute in the cellar. But from an academic standpoint, he or she would be able to describe it in a way that I couldn't or wouldn't be able to understand, just because the chemistry background is not something that I've spent time figuring out, and I'm kind of in a position where I don't have to. Is the way what I've reasoned is I'll always be surrounded by people that understand that the touch and feel and the instinct, the understanding of what we grow here is the more important part.
So the idea is for you to take over the business at some point in the future.
Yeah, and then sell to Constellation immediately. Mm-hmm. It's a joke that my dad doesn't find funny yet. But of course I would rather sell to Kendall Jackson.
Yeah.
No, down with the ship. If you ever see Keenan for sale, something has gone terribly wrong. So yeah, this is just maintain, at the very least, maintain what is already an amazing program with some amazing wines. And then, as you can see, we already have evidence of things that we're progressing and experimenting with. So I think the future is bright. As long as the undergirding structure of this country and modern society doesn't fall apart, we're going to be making good wine for a long time.
Well, I take a lot of heart in the fact that there's this continuity again when you feel so invested in it, and you feel that degree of confidence, because I think you are being very honest when you say this is my legacy, this is what I'm going with.
Yeah, I would love to sit down with the kids of families that had the option, or had something similar before them, like I do here, and just said, you could sell it. For the life of me, unless you've, there are of course just things going on in your life where it's just you can't change your life that dramatically. That's fine, but if you got some job down in the Bay Area or wherever you're working, it's just like, why wouldn't you drop everything to take over this and live here and make wine and just live in this world and this culture? It's intoxicating. But there are those families. You hear it all happens almost every year where you get to a second or third generation, and it's like there's either too many siblings and they probably know that the chemistry won't work. Yeah. They obviously know something that I would never know, which is how their family would operate, and it always stuns me when there's a third generation that can't muster the interest to keep it going. Even as just a farm, you don't have to be a productive winery. That's a whole different pain in the ass. But even just as a farm, keeping the estate going, selling the fruit, maintaining that birthright essentially for future generations. I guess a big fat check is tempting, but I could never see it getting just trading it for this.
Really the soul of the valley are small businesses, regardless of how much consolidation is going on. So it is in fact heartbreaking when you run across those instances for whatever valid, legitimate reasons. I feel like just the very essence of where we are is supported by people that got here and made so much value out of this in so many aspects. And, the world's eyes are on Napa all the time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think the next 10 years are going to be pretty telling as far as how small independent wineries like ours can survive, because those that have been lucky enough to get to a second generation, now my generation's I turned 30 later this year, so there's a small contingent of third generation people of my age where that succession plan is probably being discussed starting now-ish, and people are starting to take people's temperatures of who's interested in what, and if they're anything like our family, I established my interest a long time ago, and there's no question, but you do get families where, I just saw a coyote outside. There are families that, these kids go to college and they get a cool job somewhere else and their career's not involved, and they do have to have that conversation. So I think a lot of families that are similar age group cohort as ours are going to be starting to have that conversation with some of the bigger wineries that we all know and love here in the Valley, and we'll see what happens. We'll see.
Is this one of your concerns for the future of the Valley? And
I go back and forth on it, honestly, because I think on the one hand, it's probably not healthy for the Valley as a whole, because I think in the aggregate, the more commercialization, more consolidation we get, the more that promotes a non-positive image of Napa as a whole to those that might be considering visiting. But on a smaller, more local scale, I think the more small, independent, cool wineries that wave the white flag and give up, the more that will be available to more people looking for those kind of wineries when there are less available, and perhaps we'll reap the benefits of that, of just being able to stick it out longer than anyone else can. So I'm not sure. I think I would prefer Napa just to be completely full of small, aggressive, independent wineries, but we're never going to get back to that. So the question is, the direction is it going? Is it good? I'm not sure. I just know that we want to stick around longer than anyone else to see what happens on the other side.
Good. Do you have any other concerns about the future of Napa? I mean, do you see any trends that...
Global warming, for sure.
Yeah.
I know that people are starting to forecast that into their business models now, and have been for a bit now. Farmers in Calistoga, on the other side of the valley, Atlas Peak, Howell Mountain, these little bit warmer areas are starting to think about life beyond Cabernet when they're getting temperatures where Cabernet just shuts down and doesn't do very well. And they're starting to look to Spain and parts of Italy and Portugal for other grapes that right now are totally unknown and virtually have no market for Americans, but they're not going to have much of a choice if they're going to stay in the vitis vinifera business. So Cabernet won't forever be sustainable with higher temperatures, and so people are beginning to start talking about, what's life after Cabernet mean, and what's going to look like for the American consumer, and that kind of thing. That said, Spring Mountain's pretty uniquely positioned to continue growing Cabernet even into, worst case scenario, several degrees increase in average temperature, because we are that cool climate area. We're just going to be moving into temperature zones that already exist in other AVAs.
Yeah.
So again, just so grateful to be in this particular area, but that is of great concern. Of course, water in general, while we have plenty of it, it's not like I don't want the rest of the valley to go without. And Obviously went through many years of drought here in California, and I can't see that getting any better in the future, especially with more and more people living here.
Yeah.
And it getting hotter and hotter. So environmental concerns for sure. Number one immediate concern for any winery here in Napa that owns their own land is labor, especially on the vineyard side, but even populating front of house, office, administration. It's tough to find talent that can also live here and afford to live here. Is the biggest issue, is finding people that don't have to commute 2 hours both ways to get home, and try and create a way that people can maintain some sort of semblance of quality of life. And with Napa, you can imagine with the real estate and how many wealthy people own second and third homes here, how few primary homes there are available to just regular folks. So that's the issue. And then of course with field labor, those guys are coming from all over, from distant places, and it's just not convenient. I mean, we're at a point now where workers would rather get paid $15 in Watsonville picking strawberries and artichokes than come up here and get paid $22, $25 an hour and have to commute 4 hours both ways, and be able to afford to live down in Watsonville. So that's the issue. That's really pushing people very quickly to start considering mechanizing parts of their operation, if they haven't already. My hope is that the Valley Floor will do that pretty quickly and alleviate some of the pressure on the labor markets. We can have a little bit of that left for us in the hillsides, because the technology for hillside mechanization is way, way behind what it is on the Valley Floor. It's going to take some much more special machinery.
The conclusion of this interview can be found in the next podcast, already available for your download. Thanks again for tuning in to the official podcast of Palate Exposure, featuring Ilona Thompson.